Well, welcome everybody. I'm so happy that you're here with us this afternoon. I'm your host, Ann Dolin. And today we're talking about the PSAT, understanding your child's score and creating an SAT and ACT strategy. I want to welcome my expert and co-host, Pete Pecoraro. Pete, I'm so glad that you're here with us today.
Thank you for having me. And delighted to be here for such an important topic. Lots of changes going on. So happy to get
It
into it.
is. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's an important topic, lots of changes going on. And I think for this group of parents, we have a lot of 10th parents of 10th graders. It's a pivotal year because those kids are going to be in for the changes on the ACT, which we'll touch on a little bit later after we get in depth with the PSAT. So a little bit about Pete. He's a test prep tutor here with us at Educational Connections. And not only does he work with kids every day, one-to-one, but he's also our staff development lead, meaning he trains our incoming tutors and is just so brilliant at it. Not only that, Pete is a former high school teacher. He has a teaching degree from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And fun fact, he was his high school valedictorian. So Pete, let's kick us off here and tell us, you often say that the PSAT is a gateway test. What is the role of the PSAT?
Yeah, it is a gateway test. And to our viewers, you might not know all of these tests. You might not say, I've never seen or heard of 8, 9 before or 10. But what I wanted to illustrate here is that there's kind of like a stepping stone. The SAT has been very good at kind of creating milestones along the way for students. So even though your school might not offer it, if you've heard of it, or if your school is offering it, I want to talk a little bit more about it. The 8, 9 is meant for eighth and ninth graders, and this is to set a baseline for their high school career, to kind of like get an early measurement of where they're at subject wise. The 10 PSA 10 is offered to sophomores typically in the spring of their sophomore year, and that's more to for like getting closer to college readiness. Um, that test, measuring or getting a sense of that. Then comes the test that probably most people are familiar with is the PSAT, the National Merit Scholar version of it. And now at this point, I think it's appropriate to look at that as like this is decisional for my college application. So we're going from high school readiness to college readiness to I'm ready to submit. I'm thinking about like should this be the test that I go for when I start doing my college apps, and then resulting in the official SAT. Would like to add that the P stands for preliminary. So when you're in those preliminary tests, none of that creates a score that's official, that would be where you're submitting it to a college. But I think it's very important to establish the readiness as you're kind of growing with your skills and maturity uh, throughout your high school classes.
Pete, let's talk about what's on the PSAT. Tell us a little bit about the breakdown.
Yeah, it's there's two broad categories of subjects: reading and writing, and math. So it used to be a little bit more involved, but now it's boiled down to these. We dig into it as I do with students. It's a little bit more involved than that, but for our purposes, this is what the test is all about: reading and writing. Two modules for that, and then two modules of math, and that's the makeup of the PSAT. And all of those other tests that I mentioned are structured this way, even the 8, 9, and of course the official test.
And Pete, just like the official new SAT, called the digital SAT too, it's adaptive. What does adaptive mean?
Adaptive means that the test is looking at in the first module your baseline skills and competence, and then based on that the test will increase or get easier in difficulty for the second module. So it's looking at your strengths, and if if you achieve to a certain level, the second module will get harder. That also increases the opportunity for more points. So there's that. But if if you get the easier version of based on your performance on round one, then then that's what'll happen for your second module. So it's based on its own algorithm.
And it's comparable in difficulty to the SAT. Would you say so?
I largely agree with that. The PSAT, even though it's preliminary, is still about as difficult as the SAT. I would say this that the hardest questions on the PSAT are not as hard as the hardest questions on the official SAT. So there is a difference in difficulty that level there, but that's subtle. In the main, the two tests compare very favorably and in terms of difficulty. Most students wouldn't notice a big difference between the two.
And the scale's different. The top score is not 1600 like the SAT.
That's true. And the PSAT, it's 1520. On the 8-9, by the way, which I know it's not the most known test, but that one's 1440. So it was from 1440, 1520 for the PSAT 10, and then 1600 for the official test.
Pete, a lot of parents here today said, "Oh, my child's taken this. I've seen the score reports." And they have, or if they haven't taken it yet, they're gonna see something like this. Walk us through what this score report means.
Yeah, there is a wealth of information here. We just need to know how to use it. On the far left, we get the composite score. That's the 10-10 for this particular student. We get the broad categories for reading and writing and math. So that there's a breakdown of those two, which right there is very revealing. Most students have one that's slightly higher than the other, sometimes noticeably higher than one over the other. And of course, we're going to use that to kind of set priorities. So you get your two broad subject scores, but I think even we have to go even deeper than that, because if you go to further to the right, knowledge and skills, we get all of the subcategories underneath those main categories. For example, standards of English conventions under reading and writing. That's grammar and punctuation. So that tells me a lot of information right there. If that's one of the lower ones, and it tends to be, and same on the math side. Geometry and trigonometry is its own category. So these subcategories are invaluable for finding out where's the student, where are the gaps, and in gaps, to put it in a positive, where are the opportunities? Where are the opportunities to lift that score? Target those weaker areas.
Yeah, I know you mentioned grammar and punctuation, and also you touched on geometry. It seems like those are areas that kids do have skill gaps because they haven't seen it in a while or they haven't
Right.
practiced much of it. And those are super coachable areas, would you say?
Absolutely. Very teachable, very, very liftable. So that's what I call like the low hanging fruit. Let's get that, because that's where a lot of the gains can be made, because they're based on rules. They're based on formulas. Reading is harder because it's kind of in the moment, where it's gathering the main idea and kind of unpacking a complicated paragraph or poem. But things that are rule based and formulas based, such as the ones that we're talking about, they tend to be like wonderful opportunities to to get that lift, to get small victories quickly. I think makes a big difference to kids, because they feel like, okay, this is helping. I can get 30, 40 more points like readily. So I use that a lot. To the far right, we see the National Merit Scholarship Score. So students who are interested in that and are trying to kind of achieve at the highest levels, you do get that score.
And Pete, I know you're talking about lifting scores. So just to clarify, it doesn't mean that you're going to take this PSAT, practice the PSAT, and take the PSAT again. It means that when the student comes time to practice for the real SAT, this can be a marker, or this can be your guide in a
Right.
way
It's
to
a
help.
way of setting priorities. That's the
Yeah.
way I think about it. Prioritizing, I teach all of the skills to almost every student, but realistically, I want to try and determine what that student needs most of all. So it's setting the marker, like you said, and setting up priorities for our work together.
So we talked about this score report as an example being based on a national sample, meaning if your student lives in Virginia, they're being compared to kids across the country. But then students also have access to local data, and this allows students to compare themselves to other kids at their school, their district, their state, and their county. Tell us about this.
So much the same as the report that we just saw, but again, this is more local and so it's kind of like students are kind of peer based. They said, "Well, how am I doing in my school?" Or where I live. So you get much of the same information in terms of knowledge and skills. Those subcategories are still there, but now it's based on closer to where you live. And as we were talking about recently, that the colleges look at this quite deeply. They look at kind of like where you fall nationwide, but even more meaningfully, they do take into consideration like where are you at in your state or in the city that you live in. So it's just getting more granular with the data, going from a national level to a local measurement.
Yeah, that's a great point because when kids go to take the real SAT, they are compared to kids in their school, not necessarily somebody in Iowa. So let's talk a little bit about how we use this data strategically, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of information here. How do with a student who maybe is younger, so maybe they took it in eighth, ninth, or 10th grade, how do you take this information and guide them as opposed to somebody who's taken it the fall of their junior year?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think where parents and teachers can use this information for like the PSAT 8-9 is to think about like, okay, where are you at in school? Maybe you need help with school stuff, like see your classroom teachers or your tutors for like you're in the early part of your high school career. So maybe there's some like early intervention that can happen there. You're having trouble with math or algebra one or something at the school level. When it gets to kind of like the 10th and 11th grade, I think it's more of an, is this going to be the test for me as a data point or a decision as to which test I take, or how am I going to guide my test prep for getting into college. So I think those are the strategy aspects. Like, what can you do in school, and what test are you going to take, like where you're trying to get into college, or and even another aspect is maybe at that earlier level, would AP courses be good? Honors classes be good if you kind of like get like a pretty strong score on the 8-9 or the 10, maybe some more academic rigor in your schoolwork. And then ultimately, maybe test optional. There are many ways to go to college and not even necessarily the ACT or SAT. So that you can this goes into like how the strategy piece of what these tests can do.
Pete, let's talk about the test optional route because a couple years ago we would have a completely different conversation about this. But what's happened more recently is
Yeah.
that schools that were test optional are now saying, actually, we want to see a test score, or we're requiring, or we're test preferred, or they're still test optional, but truly they're accepting kids with with good test scores more so than kids that are not submitting a score. And we saw this initially when these big name brand schools came out, like Harvard and UT Austin, Yale, Georgia, and they were in the front. And at first we're like, oh, that's Harvard, who cares? But all those schools are kind of setting a precedent for those who
Yeah.
come.
Yeah, they kind of set the tone. I mean, and the rest, many follow after that. These headlines here in the last 12 months have been instrumental. I mean, very demonstrative of this trend. So, a year or two ago, in the pandemic, test optional had kind of like more meaning. But now I kind of ask myself, how optional is optional when you see all of these headlines, when you see it hitting the news, mainstream news. It's I think we're kind of getting around to the fact that test scores are kind of are becoming mandatory. Um, so that's our kind of our current that's the current landscape.
Yeah. And so let's look at some other data when we see colleges that many students apply to: Virginia Tech, UNC, Chapel Hill, Virginia, Michigan State. What does this tell you about, and by the way, this is last year's data. So we see that,
Right,
right? And so we
right.
know that this is much higher. It's going to be much higher for this year's data. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing here.
Yeah, look at that. I mean, they're all above 50%. I mean, so that what does that tell us? The dominant trend, the majority at a test optional school that's like ostensibly test optional, students are submitting scores 54%, 71%. So that kind of underscores the head underneath the headlines. And now here's the data, here are the numbers. We're measuring it. It kind of like points to the reality that even the students realize I have to submit a score. And I should try and make it my best. I mean, I should try and make a good faith effort to that putting my best foot forward. These aren't small numbers. Every single number there is over 50%. That's the majority. So
Yeah.
that again, that just underscores what we kind of already know.
And it's interesting because one of the questions we often hear from parents is, well, I heard that UVA likes the SAT, or, Chapel Hill likes the ACT. And actually, it doesn't really matter. Schools don't favor either one. If you eventually decide to submit a test score, every school across the country submits both, or accepts both test
That's both,
scores.
right? Yeah, I
Yeah.
still hear that all the time, even to this very day. I think that's kind of like a legacy factor of of where these tests were popular. Over the years, they're the dominance in the Midwest and the East, but none of that's true. The schools are agnostic toward those tests. So as long as you submitted one, they're not going to say they're not thinking, oh, it's you should have taken the ACT or it's or anything along those lines is not true.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about both tests, and then we'll talk about how to know which test your child should take if they do decide to go in this direction. So, Pete, we know that there's pros and cons of submitting a test score in the first place. Pros can be that it helps you to stand out, as you mentioned. It's in competitive schools, it can help you to gain admission, give schools another data point because there is so much grade inflation. And many kids have very similar high GPAs, shows the student took initiative. And if your child doesn't submit a test score, it's one less data point for the school to review. And of course, they're going to put greater scrutiny on every super scoring is and how this can really help a student score.
Yeah, super scoring is a blend of all of your best scores from the individual subjects across the number of tests that you've taken. So it's going to take your very best English I'm talking about the ACT, which I think is with 4 subjects. I think super scoring is a little bit easier to understand with the ACT. But your very best English, your very best math, very best reading, highest science, even if that was across 2, 3, or even more tests. So it's a great way to present your highest composite score to the college. You could have had a great test, but then had a bad science. But it's the last part of the test. It's like, I was tired. I didn't do a great job. Well, maybe the next test, the science is better. You're going to use that. You're going to use that in the super score. So it's just blending all of your highest subject scores to create the highest average score.
And same on SAT, right?
Yes, SAT I think it's less kind of like driven that way, but it happens there as well. And all of the colleges understand this now.
Yeah. And so they're not seeing a lot of parents say, oh, will they see if my child took it 3 times, the SAT 3 times, will they see all 3 sets of scores? And the answer is they see the super score. So they're going to see your top reading and writing and your top math. And that's what will pop up on the admissions counselor screen.
On the second or third try.
And Pete, I know that you've worked with kids in both group classes and also one-to-one individual test preparation. Tell us about your process for working with students one-to-one and what some of those advantages are over having a group class.
Yeah, one to one is by far the optimal, the most ideal setting for test prep because it allows for the dedicated focus, the dedicated attention, and the priorities of the areas that that student needs. So And then I feel like you can kind of establish the rapport one-on-one much better. So a student can ask his or her questions his or her way, as many of them as they need. So it's very kind of like I always say it's a wonderful opportunity to be selfish, as it's all about you when it's one-on-one. For my approach, I feel like you have to be really methodical about how you tackle these tests. I have a kind of like a rhythm to what we do and what needs to be done. First of all, we only use official practice tests. There are many companies out there doing many things, but I feel like you have to take their tests their way. So that means official SATs that have been retired, the current books that come from those companies, the many ACTs. There are dozens. There are dozens and dozens of official ACT documents. You have to take the test their way. Our program involves homework, guided practice, and then individual. You try things on your own in the homework, taking the methods and strategies that we use in sessions, and then do that do that as homework. So then that becomes kind of like the feedback loop for the next session. How did the homework go? What do we need to look at? Introduce new topic with guided practice and individual practice. To me, you have to have a game plan, and the one-on-one approach kind of allows for our tutors to really stick to and implement the game plan.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Pete. And if you're interested in learning more about our one-to-one approach to test prep here at Educational Connections, I invite you to take the next step, and you can scan this QR code, which will take you to our calendar, and you can book a call with us. Happy to talk to you. But also, if you're just looking for information, you can go to our website at ectutoring.com. And at the top, there's a drop-down menu for test preparation as well. And also, we're happy to help you. If you're kind of on the fence, like, I don't know what test is best for my child, we do this all day long. Like, we help parents figure this out. And we're happy to have a free call with you. It's like 15-20 minutes. We'll kind of like look through everything with you, just specifically about your child, and help you to make those decisions as well. So, Pete, we're at the end of our time. Thank you so much for being my guest again today.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you for having me back. Appreciate it.
And thank you, parents, for being here this afternoon. I wish you all the best for a wonderful holiday season. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.